So how did the United States become the world superpower? I mean, really, how did it happen? Well, the story isn't simple. It's not one single event. It's a long chain of calculated decisions, brutal compromises, and undeniable conquests. And the consequences of those choices are things we are still living with today.
And that quote really gets to the heart of what we're talking about. We're not here to look for good guys and bad guys. We're going to look at the specific decisions, the real turning points that built an empire. So, where does the story like this even begin? Well, it has to start with the land itself. But, and this is a huge but, this land was anything but empty. You know, long before the United States was even an idea, this continent was already home to a vast network of nations. I'm not talking about scattered tribes, but hundreds of distinct, complex civilizations, each with its own unique culture, its own laws, its own languages. It was a thriving world that had been here for thousands of years. And what unfolds over time is this really brutal, systematic process. It all starts with contact in the 1600s, but it quickly escalates. You see this relentless cycle of promises made, treaties signed, and then treaties broken. By the 1830s, it wasn't just random, it was official, state-sponsored policy. A policy of forced removal, best exemplified by the Trail of Tears, where thousands died. What's absolutely crucial to understand here is that the foundation of this new American nation was laid directly on the land and the lives of its original people. All right, so that's the land. Let's move to the second pillar of this rising power, its economy. And to really get a grip on America's early wealth, we have to confront its very dark engine. 12.5 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's the estimated number of African men, women, and children who were captured and forcibly transported across the Atlantic. It's a number so huge, it's almost impossible to comprehend the human reality of it. But it was that trade that powered an economic revolution. Here's the core truth. Slavery wasn't just some horrible social issue happening on the side. It was the economic bedrock of the nation. The incredible profits from cotton, from sugar, all generated by enslaved labor, literally funded America's growth. This entire system, where people were legally classified as property, created the deep economic and moral fracture that would ultimately tear the country apart in the Civil War.
Okay, so you've secured the land and you have this powerful, growing economy. The next thing you need? An idea. An ideology to justify pushing those borders ever outward.
And that idea had a name, Manifest Destiny. This was an incredibly powerful concept. It basically framed territorial expansion not as a conquest, but as fulfilling a divine plan. It gave a moral, even religious justification for taking land, arguing it was America's God-given duty to rule from coast to coast. So, how did this destiny actually happen? Well, it was realized through force. First, a war with Mexico, which led to the seizure of huge new territories. Second, any remaining native resistance to this westward push was brutally and systematically crushed. And finally, all these actions were woven into a national story. America was destined for this. Let's be clear, this wasn't just expansion, it was empire building.
Then comes the 20th century, and with it, a brand new catalyst for power: global war. The two world wars would completely transform the United States, taking it from a regional player to the dominant global superpower we know today.
I mean, just think about the contrast here. While the great powers of Europe were literally tearing each other apart, their cities in ruins, their economies totally shattered, what was happening in America? Factories were running nonstop, supplying the Allies with everything from weapons to food to loans. America profited immensely, emerging from the wars with its industry intact and absolutely booming. And out of the ashes of World War II, a new economic order was born. At its center, the US dollar. It was officially made the world's reserve currency. Now, what does that mean? It means that for countries to trade with each other, they needed dollars first. That one move, right there, basically made the US the world's banker, cementing its spot at the very top of the global financial system.
And then came the final terrifying display of power. The use of atomic bombs on Japan did a lot more than just end the war. It was a declaration to the entire planet. It announced a new kind of military might, a new era of American dominance, and it sent a very, very clear message. We are untouchable.
So after World War II, the hot war ends, but the fight for global dominance just enters a new phase, the Cold War. And this one would be fought less with armies and more in the shadows.
The Cold War becomes this huge global chess match against the Soviet Union. And to keep their rival in check, the US used all these covert tactics. The CIA was orchestrating coups to overthrow governments it didn't like. It was fueling brutal proxy wars from Vietnam to Afghanistan. And yeah, it was supporting dictators, as long as they were anti-communist. All the while, back home, the fear of communism was used to justify these shadow wars.
You really have to understand that American power has always had two sides to it. On one hand, you've got the power of the sword, the hard power, right? The military, the economic sanctions. But just as important, maybe even more so, was the power of the story. Hollywood movies, global brands, and this incredibly powerful idea of the American dream that exported a narrative about the nation that was often more influential than any army.
And all of that, it brings us to today. The United States is still the world's superpower, of course. But a century of being on top? Well, that has come with a pretty steep price.
And what does that price look like? Well, it looks like decades of seemingly endless wars abroad and a vast surveillance culture at home. It's the immense influence of corporations on politics, and, maybe most of all, it's the deep, painful divisions we see within society itself. This is the modern legacy of American power. You know, when you step back and look at the whole picture, from those first wagons pushing west across the continent, all the way to the financial and military networks that now stretch across the entire globe, you can see how every single one of those choices, made in the pursuit of power, has left its mark, creating the interconnected and often conflicted world we all live in today.
Which leaves us with one final, unavoidable question. Looking back at this entire journey, the conquests, the conflicts, the consequences, was the price of all that power justified? That's the question history asks, but it's one that gives no easy answers.